going to start this off like a regular interview, but I don't want you to be affected by this at all. I want you to be like, kind of like we were talking out there.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I'm here with Malin Uthaug. She's originally from Norway, and then she came to Prague, where we're at right now. And she originally went to get her BA in Empire State University, right, which is a part of NYU. And then you went to how do you pronounce that?
Maastricht University.
Yeah.
By correction, like I went to University of New York in Prague, which is part of Empire State College, so not NYU.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Yes,
yeah.
that's all good.
Yeah, it's good to clarify those things. And now you're back in Prague, and you're currently getting your PhD.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're getting your PhD specifically in the focus of ayahuasca and 5-MeO DMT.
Yes.
All right. So awesome. Is there anything like just off the bat that you kind of want to preface, like how you got into this, and just explain a little bit about your story and background?
Yeah, so as we spoke about earlier, like, and also what I've spoken about in other interviews like this, is that where I'm at today is because of what I've been through before, and so the past 4 to 5 years has been very tough, and I've basically come to focus on healing a very traumatic experience that I had in Jordan a few years ago, and so I ended up here listening to a talk about ayahuasca, and then I got in contact with one of my best friends in Colombia, and she helped me a lot with that, and I had my first session with ayahuasca, and so that sort of like started everything.
Okay.
And so from then everything just sort of like, yeah.
So
happened.
you would call it, you basically had PTSD from a traumatic event, and you did the ayahuasca, that released the trauma.
Part of it.
Part of it. Do you feel like you got it fully released, or is it still there?
So I think like it depends on what you mean by still there. Like, of course, the memory of that experience is there, but the question is, does it affect me in the same way?
Right.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
Not in that deep and anxiety-provoking way. Of course, sometimes I think about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, no, that happened. But I think my relationship to the event has changed, and so has my response to it.
Yeah. Now, I heard you share about that, and there's this quote that always comes up with me, and I shared this about my story recently when I was at the Wim Hof certification, and it's a Rumi quote, and it's, the wound is where the light enters you, right? Because you looked, and many people, what they do is they become the victim, right? Which is like, oh, this happened to me, poor me, and blah, blah, blah. But now you're looking at that event as actually the catalyst for where your life is now. So it's actually, there's some gratitude towards that event, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to get to that point, because I think I spent too much time marinating myself in my own PhD, you know?
Yeah.
And just that was also the only thing that I knew.
Yeah.
And so finding another way was scary, because it's unknown to me, and automatically, like, humans are scared of the dark because we don't know what is there. You know, it's an unknown space.
Yeah.
And so similarly, when you are embarking on this journey of healing, it's terrifying, because you're so like secure in that space you are at this point, even though it might not be what's best for you. And so trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm gonna go to a different place, and it terrifies me.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to do that, and I'm really proud of anyone who is able to just embark on that journey and just trust that process.
Yeah.
And I think what's
kind of confront what's in the recesses of your mind, kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a question about, that's the thing that kind of sparked me back there. Have you ever studied dissociation at all?
It's become it's come to me at this point in time, and I'm studying more and more about it.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in it.
Okay, because that's kind of like, so I would say there's people with PTSD who know they have it, and then there's also people who have like the mind is like a honeycomb where you can actually break off and have certain memories, right? And like you don't even know it's there. Would you say that ayahuasca, because of the neural kind of reset, it opens up that pathway that has maybe been blocked?
I think like it's a catalyst for opening up those memories.
Okay.
And the way it does that could be related to this. It can take you to this place, perhaps, maybe not entirely this dissociative state, which I think another medicine could do better, ketamine or 5.
Yeah.
But I think it is opening that door, and you get to look inside. Okay, what is there?
Yeah.
You know, and that is effective because you get to look at what you need to work on.
Right.
What's the problem?
Yeah.
And then having done that, for example, in a therapeutic session where you actively engaging in a conversation with a therapist about what is there could be helpful.
Yeah.
But as of now, I do not know whether ayahuasca is the best medicine
for that situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it could help.
Yeah.
Perhaps it could be a step to be like, okay, let's look, what is it in your baggage that you're carrying that is so heavy?
Yeah.
And so perhaps ayahuasca could be able to give you a peek into that.
Yeah.
And then from there you could figure out, okay, this is what we need to work on, and then move on to a different medicine.
Okay.
Perhaps.
So this is a good subject, and this is a perfect line of talk. So what would you say ayahuasca's best purpose is for in terms of healing? Like, if someone is saying like, oh, I'm looking at psychedelics, like I know, for example, ibogaine has like I think it's like a 90% recovery rate or 85% for people with like heroin addiction or something like that. So like that's probably better than ayahuasca, right? And are you familiar with, like, have you studied the ibogaine at all?
No, not as much as I've done with other medicines. Like, no, it's mainly been ayahuasca, 5, or mescaline.
Okay.
But as with dissociation, ibogaine has come to my attention too.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to look more into other things like that.
Okay, cool. So with ayahuasca, what would be based on your research, what would you recommend ayahuasca for? Like, what healing purposes?
So from what I found in my own research,
Make sure it's still going. Okay.
is that it relieves symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress.
Okay.
It can increase mindfulness-related capacities, which are important, like, for example, awareness.
Creativity.
And that is also very important because, for example, a person with post-traumatic stress disorder tends to just focus on their problem inside this box.
Yeah.
And so what my colleague found is that during the influence of ayahuasca, your divergent thinking abilities are increased. So that is interesting because it allows you to start thinking outside of the box, away from that problem.
Gotcha. So just like I read that in there, divergent thinking. So basically, you start to be more open, essentially.
Yes.
To different thought processes.
See?
Okay.
Yeah, and so like it's different from convergent thinking. You can think of convergent thinking as with math problems. Like there's only one solution.
Right.
And so someone with depression or post-traumatic stress disorder is just banging their head against a wall trying to solve that problem with only one way. And perhaps that way is what they learned in their past. Like, okay, their parents taught them one way to deal with shit that happens.
Yeah, it's stress.
But it's not working.
Yeah.
And so then perhaps you get a new perspective from that ayahuasca trip and you also have now this increased divergent thinking. And so you can look at things from a different angle and perhaps come up with a better way of tackling the problem.
I got you. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why you're saying basically ayahuasca could be the like opening the door, taking the peek in, and then now you're like, okay, now I
Yes.
see different ways that I can deal with this, or
Mm-hmm.
other approaches that I might be able to do, but it won't actually release the trauma.
I don't think, maybe for some people it could induce this powerful trauma release,
Mm-hmm.
but as I said before, I think maybe in my personal opinion and also experience, I feel that 5-MeO might be better for that.
Okay.
But I would love to see a comparison of, like, for example, what medicine would release most trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But still, like, there isn't anything out there, I think. It's just, like, mainly about the effects that we see.
Okay.
And so I think like that it can enhance your mindfulness related capacities is also important, because when you gain awareness, you might be able to stop before, let's say, an outburst or explosion because of emotional overload. And so you gain more awareness as you approach that peak.
Yeah.
And so you might be able to stop it because of your awareness here.
Yeah.
Another thing is that, of course, it could elevate or, like, decrease depression, stress, and anxiety symptoms, which is great.
Yeah.
You know, and so when that is decreased, your awareness is enhanced.
Yeah.
You know, it's a nice little mix.
This is directly. I start connecting the dots. Like we were talking about David Hawkins before.
Mm-hmm.
David Hawkins has these two pictures of like left brain dominant and right brain dominant, and like the like kind of the neuroscience and the track of the brain, and like what neuroreceptors or what's the word I'm looking for? Neurotransmitters are being used,
Mm-hmm.
and like the track to the emotions. And so, would you think that it blends the two brains better because it neuroresets, or does it open up the right brain more?
Well, I think maybe it will open up the right brain a little bit more.
Okay.
And I think what I see from people's report after ayahuasca, there's a lot of childhood memories coming up.
Mm.
And I read in the book, like, Return to the Brain of Eden, which I just showed you, and there's a lot of talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the right brain contains those memories from childhood. So if you think of it in that way, it makes sense.
Yes.
That it opens up that gate,
Yes.
or like the door into your right brain, so then you can see what is in there.
Right.
And then take it from there.
That's amazing. So this is off topic and not related, but this is the crazy question that I was going to ask you. Like, have you ever heard of like ritual abuse?
No, or like in the shamanic or the ceremonies where
it's like
shamans are taking.
Have you ever heard like MKUltra?
No.
Okay, so I mean I'll just explain it to you, but you might not have the concept of it. But this is like powerful for me because I haven't read about the memories being stored in the right brain, but that makes sense. Basically, like MKUltra is the CIA program where they would program someone like Jason Bourne. But the idea is, from what I've read, is like they have a whole system of how they do it, and they basically can create somebody into whatever they want, an assassin, a sex slave, and like they can trigger it by using words.
Yeah.
And so what they do is create that like pocket of honeycomb personality, or they create dissociation.
Yeah.
And that dissociation personality doesn't even know it exists. And so if someone had that and then they did ayahuasca, would it be like, oh my god, here's this other person, like would they all of a sudden like
Perhaps it could tap into that, like, like there might be some parts of you that you're not aware of, like it could perhaps do that, and it's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
And I'd love to explore that further. So,
Yeah, so that because I mean that goes deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But and sometimes I get caught up in that stuff, and I like to study the trauma and the brain. And it's just amazing to me that there's people out there that like could be triggered into being a sex slave
Yeah.
and not really even know it.
That's it.
And then they go back to their life and they're just like this. And that there's people out there that like governments or whatever are using, or anybody is using at that capacity, which I just think the psychedelics have the ability to, I don't know, flush that out, I guess, like
Maybe, yeah.
get rid of it.
Yeah.
But back to the topic, so ayahuasca is good for divergent thinking. It's good for taking a peek and to kind of maybe see what's going on in the recesses of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And now 5-MeO, that specifically for healing would be better for like a traumatic experience.
I think, in my opinion, I feel like 5-MeO is a great medicine to use to bring you into a certain point of this, like the dissociative state.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I probably should have emphasized earlier is that they're probably all doing that, the psychedelics, but some do it better and faster.
Okay.
And so I think with ayahuasca, because you have the ego might still be there,
Yeah.
you have the ability to steer the journey. With
Mhm.
5-MeO, there is no way to resist, and I think that's the thing.
The ego just disappears.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it's so fast, there is no way that you could just like cling on to reality
Yeah.
that easily.
Right.
And I think that's why it's better. But of course, it's finding that sweet spot. Because too much 5-MeO is just another traumatic event.
Yeah.
It could lead to more dissociation.
Right.
And so I think finding that sweet spot where you're not completely dissociative, but so like a 1 foot here and 1 foot there,
Yeah.
and then work with a therapist
Right.
and sort of like find a way to release.
Yeah. So that's a good question, actually. So you know the concept of hormesis, which is like the dosage that is the right amount for the stress response.
Uh-huh.
It's like if you get too much, it's not good. If you get too little, there's no stimulus. But like the right amount. So for example, like the Wim Hof method, actually, like they've done studies. Actually, I don't know if they've done studies on that, but the original guy who was up for like a Nobel Prize was this scientist named Schultz.
Uh-huh.
And he figured out that if you sprayed pesticides on yeast, like a lot of it, the yeast would die. But if you sprayed just a little bit, the yeast would grow. And so that when I look at like microdosing with shrooms, that's what I kind of see is like just like enough. So do we know what the like per? Everybody's different. Do we know like what's the right amount? Do we know like if someone's really big, do they need a lot more ayahuasca? Or
Yeah. That's also another question for further investigations. Like you need a lot of dose testing, safety measure, and effectiveness, you know. And so I don't think there is such a dose, like one size fits all or like one dose fits all. I think it all depends on a lot of different factors. And you also have this enzyme in your liver that is responsible for drug metabolism. And so that is different for people to people.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so some person might have a slow metabolism.
Yeah.
And so other might be faster.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things into play. And of course, like it's not only that enzyme, or like it's also psychologically, like how much resistance is in there, how much readiness for change or willingness to change is there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these things as well, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly, you know. And so we need more research for that as well.
Cool. That's leads me to the next question, which is, what do you believe the future of psychedelics will be? Like now, you know, like how many people are doing a PhD in this? Because I don't like. Are there any other people that are doing this?
Well, my colleague Natasha Mason, she's doing her PhD now, and mostly focusing on psilocybin, and so she's very focused on creativity, looking into that, and also empathy. and we're both in the same track. We got the same supervisor, so she's doing that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing this. I know a person in the Czech Republic, Rita Kočerová, is also working within this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if she's doing her PhD,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of people who wants to jump on this wagon, you know, and they
Yeah.
want to contribute, and that's amazing, because we cannot do it all by ourselves.
Right, yeah. You need a strong community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's already like a lot of great resource or like people to look up to. You have Amanda Fielding, Rick Dublin, and like
Mhm.
Dave Nichols, all of that, and people that are not PhD students like Rafael Lancelota.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a great addition as well. So yeah.
So, just on the psilocybin, the microdosing has changed my life. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, I do sometimes more than microdose, but for different experiences. But it really has, like, I had probably neurodegeneration
Uh-huh.
and whatever was going on, and it's just unbelievable the impact it's had on me
Yeah.
in expanding and opening and clearing stuff out of my head. And I have this weird thing that happens, like I can literally feel like the frequency and vibration of like food because of whatever happened to me when I got sick.
Yeah.
And so I could feel the healing happening with the psilocybin.
Beautiful.
And I read I don't know if it's a paper, an article recently, but it said, so like if someone has a traumatic event or they have had depression, like the neural pathways can kind of shrivel up, right? Or like, I guess, I don't know if it's degenerate, but kind of like shrivel up. And psilocybin actually opens them up and expands them more. Is that kind of what happens, or are you familiar with that?
It could be. Like, I'm not too familiar with psilocybin, the
Yeah.
research and all of that, so I don't want to say something that is inaccurate. You
Yeah.
know? So it could be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And even with, I guess it was 5-MeO, like it, I guess it I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly, if I'm remembering correctly, but it could help to give birth to more neurons. And I need to check that, because I don't know if I remember correctly or I'm just adding it to it, but I'll check and I'll send you that paper.
From what I've read, I remember hearing that about psilocybin.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think they're all doing similar things.
Something like, yeah.
Yeah. So it would make sense
Yeah.
that it would also do that.
Yeah. It's like a neuro regeneration.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So is there anything, so I just kind of want to, like, if someone, the book is Healing Hacks. I don't even know if I'm going to call it that yet. I'm going to probably test out the title, which is most appealing to people. But so if someone's like, I need to heal, and it was ayahuasca or 5-MeO or anything else that you studied ketamine as well a little bit? No, just those two.
Yeah.
So
Most ayahuasca and 5.
okay. And who would be good candidates for that type of stuff, right? You can't have like schizophrenic past, right?
No, it's very tricky, and I think that either way the treatment needs to be very carefully done, no matter who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, of course, more dangers or like more contraindications with people like that have schizophrenia and so on.
Is that just schizophrenia, or is it any mental illness?
I guess mostly that, and perhaps other like forms of trauma. Like there's a lot of contraindications in that too, and it's very tricky because like those are the people that also need it the most. But I guess that contraindication of previous trauma is just something that has been coming up lately when working with or like attending these ceremonies with the underground facilitators, because there is no clinical background there, and so the screening might not be done correctly, and it might add more additional trauma to the person, because there is no like I said, no clinical background. They don't know how to handle trauma. They might just make it worse.
Right.
And so that's why I felt like somebody who's traumatized shouldn't be going to these facilitators because it might just get worse.
Yeah. And there's a whole process in preparation, and that was another question I had. I know you were studying the actual effects of the ceremony, right?
Yeah.
Is that still being studied, or is that
from the 5-MeO?
Was it 5-MeO or was it ayahuasca?
So mainly, right now I finalized the field study, which is basically observational study.
Okay.
So what I did is I went to the ceremonies and I distributed questionnaires to people there.
Yeah.
I just wrapped up a data collection studying ayahuasca, but then I'm mainly I'm trying to figure out if it's the effect of the drug, if it's ayahuasca, or the setting.
Yeah.
So I'm still to do the analysis of that and to write up the paper. But it's very interesting because from that experience, like talking to the people, because they didn't know if they got placebo or ayahuasca.
Right.
So I would sit down the next day and I'm like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
And like, how was your night?
Yeah.
And some people were like, oh, I had this amazing time and I learned this and this and this.
Yeah.
And I had these amazing visions. And I'm like, that's interesting because you're in the placebo group, you know? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
So they were like, oh shit.
That's amazing.
But it's really great that we managed to pull this off because like it is still observational by nature.
Yeah.
And so we made an agreement with the facilitators that could we like separate the groups, like to give some ayahuasca and some placebo, and they were up with that. So they made it sort of part of their curriculum or whatever, that they were doing some trainings and stuff like that. So it was really interesting.
Wow, yeah, that it boggles my mind. The power of the mind boggles my mind. It's just like, it really, like, belief is actually the creation of everything. It's like, you know, I mean, obviously there's other stimulants that can bring it out, but so can you just explain how, like, the chemical process of what ayahuasca does? Do you know kind of like, is it the serotonin neurotransmitter going to be taken up more, or
So my field is not focused entirely on neurochemistry.
Okay.
So the only thing I know is that it acts on the serotonin receptors.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And just because I'm so much focused more on the behavior and the behavioral outcomes of that, so I am not entirely secure in neurochemistry.
Right.
So
and expanding on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if that's fine, like it's not my strongest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, what would you say? Have you spoken to a lot of people that have done ayahuasca?
Yes.
So do you have examples of like the impact that it's had on like people's lives? I mean, I know it's impacted you, but do you have maybe a story or two that of somebody who just like?
Yeah. One of the first people that comes to mind is one person that I interviewed when I was in Colombia.
Okay.
Because he was also in Bogota a couple of days after the experience.
Okay.
And so we met there and we were talking, and he was like, I would love to have a conversation with you because this is not the first time I had it, you know? And so he started telling me about how he took ayahuasca and was confronted with his creativity. Yeah. And so the creativity was like these little minions. I don't know if it was Oompa Loompa or if I'm mixing my own interpretation of this, but...
Yeah. I've heard that people say that before too.
Yeah.
Like little beings or whatever.
Yeah. And so like these little beings represented his creativity.
Okay.
And they're like, you're not giving us enough attention. And so similarly, as we talked about earlier with the right brain and left brain.
Yeah.
Right brain is deprived. You know, it needs that nourishment of creativity outburst, you know, like, and so he was like, oh shit, I'm so sorry, little guy, but I'll do it better.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty cool. And others that I've met have just felt like that a lot of stuff was released from them, like purging things.
Yeah.
Yvonne, my best friend in Colombia, who helped me a lot, also found her way through the use of ayahuasca.
Yeah.
She realized that we are all one, and she had to let go of this these things that didn't really bring her forward.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of insecurities in regards to her self-esteem and all of that, but she gained more self-confidence and power to push forward.
Yeah.
With that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I just hear repeatedly, like, it just changes people's lives completely.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know you got somewhere to be here soon, so, yeah, I want to, I don't want to keep you too long, but there's like a few other questions, and I don't think you did you answer like where you believe ayahuasca and 5-MeO are going to go into? I think I asked you that. Maybe we got off on a tangent.
Maybe we didn't. I know I did not answer that, and so I think it's a very interesting time because more and more things are happening.
Yeah.
And more people are jumping on this topic, and that is good, but there is also some things that we need to be wary about. Like, for me, it's important that things don't get, like, these medicines do not get only approved for a certain amount of people, that it becomes available for many, you
right.
know, and so that it's not going to cost a shit ton of money,
right.
and stuff like that. And so I hope that this whole thing of legalization
Mm-hmm.
could be done in a nice and correct way,
right.
where there is no ego involved, where there is no people trying to get profit out of that,
Mm-hmm.
because there's enough of that already with all the underground facilitators, with the underground retreats.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see a shift from that, but that requires awareness from not only the consumers, but also the researchers. Like, what do I contribute to with my work?
Right. Keep going. I'm just going to take a note.
And so I hope that we are able to do this in a good way. And I hope that eventually these medicines could become available for treatments.
Right. Like real, basically like a psychotherapist would be now. Like, people go to the psychotherapist, they'd go to like a clinic and do an ayahuasca with maybe a facilitator,
Mm-hmm.
right, to release. So, what about the preparation for that, right? Isn't there like a diet you have to follow and a lot of things?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not something that's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go do ayahuasca today, right? Or I'm gonna go.
But that's the thing that many people have. Like, it's
Yeah.
become so mainstream, and that's really upsetting because it's not fun stuff.
Yeah.
And you see people are chasing this ego dissolution.
Right.
That is like that's what people are craving now.
Right.
And so it shouldn't be about that ego dissolution, because it doesn't fix things. It's interesting to see that people who chase that just end up increasing their ego even further.
Yeah.
And so it just does the opposite of
Right.
what I feel that it should be doing,
Okay.
to make you humble and more present and aware and all of that. But
All right.
when you turn into a egocentric bastard, then that's not really helpful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how much I can swear.
Oh, you can please. Believe me. If you ever saw, I just came from the Wim Hof certification. If you saw like that, what that was. I don't know if have you ever seen Wim?
No, I haven't.
His main thing is like, breathe, motherfuckers. Just breathe, motherfuckers. Like, that's what he says. So it's like he has T-shirts with it, and so the whole community is kind of like that.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah. So so you were saying basically about people are exploiting it or can exploit it.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone wanted to do it and they thought, okay, this is probably a good avenue for me to use the medication or the medicine, how would they go about doing it? Because now, like, it's illegal in certain places, and I still, like I said, I know doctors and I know, like, very high influencers who are doing this stuff, and it's kind of like ridiculous, that it is illegal. I mean,
Yes.
there's got to be precautions, but people should have the ability to use it. I'm totally like open to all drugs being like legalized, especially plants that come from like the earth. You know what I mean? So, what should that person do? Like, how should they take steps to use ayahuasca or 5-MeO?
No, that is not legal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Right.
so like, how can they use this safely in, for example, the underground?
Right. Yeah.
I think in regards to, well, both ayahuasca and 5-MeO, there needs to be an intention. Like, why are you doing this? Should be the first question. So like, say now
That's
the person
great,
is
yeah.
not in for it for the fun, but is actually committed to the healing.
Right.
And that's great. Check. Next step is finding somebody who could help you for this process.
Right.
And so then finding a facilitator competent enough to help you with that is also crucial to have a successful start of the healing.
Yeah.
And so it's important to look into, okay, what background does this person have? What are they doing? How did they get into this?
Mm-hmm.
And how are these sessions run?
Yeah.
Like all of these things, or there's like a huge checklist of what facilitators do you pick.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to navigate that because you might also feel that, okay, this person sounds good and great and it fits for me, but then later on you realize it's a bad choice.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that too, and I think there are many checklists online that are like listing all of these questions that are important to look into.
Yeah.
But say you now found the facilitator and it's a good match, then you have your experience. What now?
Yeah.
Integration is probably more important than the experience itself.
Yeah.
And basically, yes.
Okay.
And so I think that you've had the experience and you probably learned some from it. In my opinion, I love writing stuff down and like trying to get a perspective.
Yeah.
But it's important that you have support around you.
Yeah.
Because the facilitator might not be around, he might be traveling or she might be traveling.
Right.
And so you need to have a supporting network and maybe even a therapist available who ideally should have a little bit of knowledge about altered states of consciousness, even dissociation, whatever the problem is that you are trying to heal, should be some background in that, and also altered states of consciousness. And then find a way to work on what you learned through that therapy. And just integrate things into your life, start doing things differently that might not have been productive before. So apply it to your life, and I think from then on, like that's a great. Those are great things to think about.
Yeah. Okay. So you know how people talk about shamans, like based on your opinion, is going to a shaman that has like the bloodline of like connected to the indigenous people of like Colombia or Peru a better option for some people, or is it really just based on feeling kind of thing?
I think I would go with somebody who, well, not strictly like just like clean bloodline, but that it shouldn't just be a person who had the experience itself themselves and then decided like, oh, I want to be a facilitator.
Right.
So there needs to be a certain amount of knowledge
and experience.
And one experience is not enough, because it's like most of the facilitators, especially with 5-MeO, like you see more and more of them popping up, but it's like, okay, they have the experience and now they want to share that with everybody. And it's like, the medicine called me. It's like, damn it.
Okay. I mean, I can go on and on. Is there any kind of last thoughts? Like, if someone's reading this book, that was perfect what you were saying, is like, okay, think about how you want to do this. Like, find a good facilitator, and then probably somebody who knows how to integrate you and coach you back to reality, I guess, right?
Yeah. or like I don't think even like coming back to reality might be a wrong way of saying, because that suggests that perhaps you became
You were
alienated
away, yeah.
as a result of it,
Right.
which might happen, but it might not be always the case.
Yeah.
But I think definitely having that supportive network is very important.
Crucial.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you end up in a very fragile and vulnerable place. So depending on the medicine, you know, for me, 5-MeO was very harsh because it made me question so many things and intensified so many of those questions
Yeah.
that I had.
Yeah. But like maybe it's good to say that you had no idea what you were getting into, right?
That's
it just
another
like
thing.
hit you from the side, like someone was just like, oh, you're gonna do 5, because I had another friend that
Yeah.
did that. Like,
Oh shit.
yeah, he told me about it. He said, I just did 5-MeO, and he's another Wim Hof instructor actually. And he said he was going on a trip with some people, and he was like, yeah, are you ready to do the 5-MeO? And he was like, what are you talking about? And then they showed up. Next thing you know, he's taking it,
Oh
and
my God.
he wasn't really ready for it. But
No.
he's a tough guy, so he wasn't like mentally tough, I would say. And he seemed like it was totally fine. But he said, yeah, it was he thought he was gonna die. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Like, for me, like, as I told you before, I was just, like, thrown into it.
Yeah.
But also, it was not easy for me to say no because I really wanted to know it as well.
Yeah.
And I concurred with what the facilitator said, like, this is the only way you're gonna know. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was terrified. I was like, shit, I'm not prepared. Like, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
And so afterwards,
Did you take a second hit, by the way?
No, I don't remember. Like
For some reason I've heard like you take the hit and then you can wait a little bit and then you take more or something like that.
no, it's gone.
Yeah.
I think the facilitator, like, this was toad secretion, and so I think there was around 120 milligrams
Okay.
in that pipe.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but that was like pretty much the average. And so I was gone within a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
So I don't think I needed,
Any more? Yeah.
but I think I had too much.
Okay. And how long were you gone for?
I think the entire duration was around 15 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll end it there. Oh, sorry, I ran over a little bit.
It's all good.
Yeah. So I thank you. I'm super grateful to have connected with you.
Likewise.
And I'd love to stay connected with you. And I'm going to try and connect you with some people if that's okay with you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. All right.
I'd love to
Cool.
stay connected too. And
Yeah.
if there is anything that you need help with, like if you need papers, articles, references,
Oh, great. Awesome.
I'll help you.
Yeah. That might be good for the book itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And questions that you have of things, just shoot me a message.
Awesome.
And then we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Malin.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll end it there. Oh, my leg.